Welcome in to the 48 Minutes podcast on Believe. I'm Ross Geiger, the former NBA video coordinator, and I'm joined alongside Bruce Bernstein, our four-time Emmy Award winner who spent more than 3 decades at ESPN producing NBA shows, SportsCenter, and soaking up knowledge from the best hoop analysts in the business. Also joining us is the 2-time Emmy Award winner, Michael Worldby Freer, who's a senior writer at Stat Factor, specializing in writing advanced statistical NBA reports for various announcers across the league. And tonight, we are thrilled to be joined by special guest, the former NBA media legend and current general manager at St. Bonaventure University, Adrian Wojnarowski. This is episode number 185, the Baron Davis episode, as the 2-time All-Star is the only NBA player to ever wear number 85. And Davis did it twice with both the Cleveland Cavaliers and the New York Knicks to honor his grandparents who helped raise him on 85th Street in Los Angeles. Bruce, without further ado, why don't you give our special guest a proper introduction?
In the basketball family, there's a handful of players and media members who are so famous that we know them by one name. LeBron, Michael, Kareem, Magic, Wilt, that list goes on. But in the basketball media, the list is much shorter. There's Marv, Chick, the Chuckster, and today's guest, Woj. His birth name was Adrian Wojnarowski. And I'm very proud to say that I got that pronunciation right, didn't I, Woj?
Right on it. Yep. Thanks, guys.
It used to drive me crazy, Woj, because, I'm a ESPN alum and I watched all of the shows. And it used to drive me nuts that they always kind of pronounced your name the way it was spelled as opposed to. So I actually called your former boss one time. I won't mention his name. I said, could you please tell your hosts how to pronounce Woj's name? And I never heard back. So, bad job by those guys. But anyway, the world knows you as Woj. Everyone knows you as Woj. And that has never been mispronounced. So before we jump into our discussion, here's a little bit about Woj. He recently received one of the Basketball Hall of Fame's coveted Kurt Gowdy Media Awards, the Insight Award, for his work as the foremost NBA newsbreaker of the 21st century. He revolutionized reporting and pretty much set the template in the use of social media and journalism, both at Yahoo Sports and ESPN. His Woj bombs were usually tweets, and he almost always had the scoop on every big story. And for me, as a former producer in the TV business for a really long time, I can tell you that information is the lifeblood of any show. And when you get it first and you get it accurately all the time, you have the best show, and that's what Woj did for SportsCenter and the NBA shows on ESPN. But he's a writer at heart, and he's been a best-selling author and was a three-peat winner of the Sports Writer of the Year award from 2017 to 2019. He's now, as Ross mentioned, the general manager of basketball at St. Bonaventure University, and that's an incredible story we're going to dive into as well. Please welcome Woj. It's so great to have you with us.
Well, it's an honor to be here. Great to be here with you guys. And, I've been looking forward to it.
You've seen many of your colleagues and competitors win the Gowdy Award, and now you're a made man too. So what was it like to get up there in front of the basketball world and deliver that acceptance speech? I mean, was it a surreal moment? Can you describe how it felt?
Yeah, it's a good question. And Jackie MacMullan, who has been a good friend of mine and was a colleague late in my career at ESPN and kind of near the end of Jackie's career. But I knew Jackie, she was one of my idols growing up, reading her in the Boston Globe and then SI and obviously on ESPN. And she said something to me kind of leading up, and she was nice enough to come and share the weekend with us. She said, you'll feel it when you go up to give the speech and you look around and you see all the players and Hall of Fame players that they're there to listen to you, or at least in those moments. And she was right. I was, it's funny, less the contemporaries, seeing Dwayne Wade there and Carmelo Anthony was part of the class. And that was big. It really was. But the older guys who you watched as a kid and you just never imagined, Dr. J was sitting near us, and Robert Parrish is in there, and Calvin Murphy and Nancy Lieberman. People who, when you were a kid, you watched and you just never imagined you would know any, or you'd ever get near any of them, I would say, and that was pretty cool. Alonzo Mourning. I was thinking of the people who were kind of near where we were sitting as I was getting ready to go up and talk. And so you kind of felt it in that moment. It was really neat.
Let's go back to the city of Bristol, Connecticut, a town we both know well. You were born and raised there. And when you were at Bristol Central High School, also the alma mater of
Donovan Clingan.
Of course,
Yep.
of the Blazers. You started your path to Springfield working at the Hartford Courant, and when you left for St. Bonaventure at the Olean Times-Herald, and after several newspaper jobs, the Bergen Record, the Fresno Bee, as a columnist and elsewhere, you went to Yahoo Sports full-time. In 2007, when you got to Yahoo, online journalism was in its infancy, and you were really one of, if not the pioneers. So without realizing it as you were doing it, were you basically setting the bar for everybody and kind of setting it pretty high?
Well, I went to Yahoo because I had a close friend, Dan Wetzel, who's Dan and I came up as college basketball writers together. And, I remember Dan had really built his career online. He might have had a newspaper internship in college, but he went to Hoops. I'm trying to remember what it was called. Hoops TV, CBS Sports Line. He was at Eastern Basketball Magazine, Basketball Times, when we were younger. And then I remember we had a long talk when he was deciding to go to Yahoo and leave behind just being a college basketball writer, become a general columnist. And so I was pretty familiar with Yahoo and was following it closely through him. And there was an editor there, Dave Morgan, who had seen my work in the newspaper contests. He had been at the LA Times or, the award stuff you would send stuff into. And so Dan called me one day and said, "Hey, we've got an NBA job. What do you think?" And I said, "Give me a couple hours to think about it." I had just been a general columnist, and I grew up wanting to be, Mark Kriegel and Ian O'Connor, Harvey Araton, Mike Lupica, Bob Ryan. That's what but the business was changing, and I did feel it was headed towards specialization. And I'd been at the Bergen Record for almost 10 years, and I had turned down some newspaper jobs, some much bigger jobs in the last year or two, because I kind of I think the future is going to be online. It's going to be digital. I don't know that I want to go to another newspaper job. I think I need to get online. I thought for a couple of hours and on the NBA thing, and I said, yeah, I think that would be, I didn't have to think long about it, and went to Yahoo to do the NBA. And I remember I went to tell my editor at the Bergen Record that I was leaving, and he lived in my town in northern Jersey. And I called him, and he said, "Yeah, come on over." He was cutting his lawn. He was out front. And I just said, "Hey, I thanked him for the time there. I said, I'm going to take this job. I have taken it. And I just want to thank you for and he, are you sure? You sure? Can I make you?" And I said, "No, I don't want to counter. There's nothing you can offer me. I just feel like it's time." And he said, "Well, I appreciate that. And I wish you the best." And I remember him pausing, and he said, "But I just worry no one's ever going to hear from you again." And, but it was because, like you mentioned, Bruce, I was going online. There were jobs there, but there had been a couple startups in sports and they hadn't done well. And I remember walking away from him, and it wasn't like, "Hey, I'm going to show him," or I was upset. He generally cared about me. And that's what I felt. And it wasn't, "Hey, you're making a bad move." It was, "I'm really worried about you. You sure about this?" And I remember walking away going, and his words are kind of bouncing in my head going, "I'm worried no one's ever going to hear from you again." In my mind, I said, he might be right, but I'm doing this. And I did. And Yahoo had resources and it already had a great readership and following for lots of things outside of sports. And then we had a pretty neat crew there that kind of put it on the map for sports. It was a very hungry bunch of guys with a chip on their shoulder and women who had a chip on their shoulder for, wanted to have a national stage. We all probably had been kind of regional in our career, and we were pretty hungry. And so it started what was really a great chapter in my career. I was at Yahoo for 10 years. I was at the Bergen Record for 10 years. I was at Yahoo for 10 years. And then I was at ESPN for almost 8 before I walked away.
Now, Woj, I wanted to stick on Yahoo for a second here. You talked about just kind of the come up there with the infrastructure, with the people you were working with, and the hunger that you all had. But it still wasn't ESPN at that given time. But what you guys did have, especially yourself, is the results and the reporting and the news stories that you guys were creating. So, and kind of a David versus Goliath type dynamic. Did you feel a certain way about having that underdog role?
Yeah. Yeah. And it really fit me. I was probably most comfortable in that. We all were. And at the Hall of Fame weekend, several of the guys who had been a part of that with me, Johnny Ludden, who is our editor, was from San Antonio, Chris Mannix, Bobby Marks, obviously. But a few of us from, the Yahoo, and then it was the Vertical. My wife, it's funny, there were a lot of different pictures we wanted to take, and my wife had said, make sure you get a Yahoo Vertical photo of your group. I don't think I'm missing anybody who was there that weekend, but and we did. That was a very I love that era. It was, when you go to ESPN, and ESPN was great, and I loved it. But I remember something Adam Schefter told me when I was on my way in, and he was right. He said, "You're playing for the Yankees. It's kind of like you're coming to play for the Yankees, and no one is going to root for you anymore." And he was right about that. But I was proud of what we built. I think for a lot of people, they have Bruce knows this. ESPN is like this machinery, and you're a spoke in this wheel, whoever you are. Some are bigger spokes, but no one's bigger than the place, and no one is. And it was there before you, it's going to be there after you leave, and it's going to be really profitable, and people are going to watch, and it doesn't really matter. And that's not to say there's not people who make great impact there,
Sure.
But it's bigger than any one person, certainly. And, but ESPN can make stars, and it can make having that machinery at your disposal can make the job a lot easier. And I was proud of what we built outside of ESPN and how we did it outside of ESPN. We didn't need ESPN to dominate we didn't need it. And now going to it was the next logical move, and kind of felt like I'd done everything I could do at Yahoo. But I was always proud of kind of what we did at Yahoo. And then the other one I forgot, it was Jonathan Gavoni, who was in that photo.
Yeah.
and Jonathan Gavoni and Mike Schmitz, and the group we had there. So it was a lot of fun, and you were creating something. We started doing that draft show, and we were doing just incredible numbers, and people were watching our draft show, and we had Tom Crean on it, and Tom, who just is. It was really the first TV. It was video streaming, but Tom was so good at he's prepared for the draft. He was opinionated, and his opinions. I look back, and a couple guys he said on draft night, like, this is not a good pick for this team. I remember one in particular, man, he was right. And a couple. Remember the guy's college coach went after him. Tom was right, and so. And then you had Gavoni, Schmitz, and obviously Mike Schmitz, who came to ESPN with us, and then obviously he's gone on to great things with the Blazers. But yeah, it was a special time. The underdog mentality, which for me, I always tried to keep, even at ESPN. It's not easy to keep that at ESPN. You're probably kidding yourself a little bit, but I would try to find ways to still do it, because that's what I knew. I mean, I was not an overnight. I mean, I did the Miracle of St. Anthony when I was 31 at the Bergen Record, but I was like 37 years old, right? I think 37 years old when I got to Yahoo, and nobody really knew who I was outside of, Northern New Jersey, that region. And then the Miracle of St. Anthony brought in, I think the book was well received, and people in the basketball community knew it. But even then, you go to Yahoo at 37 and now, and even then it took a few years as we were building it. So it took a while to get there, which is good. I look back on it, and it made me appreciate the whole thing even more.
Now, well, you mentioned, you touched on it for a second here about your time at ESPN, but the funny thing is, most people realize this, but ESPN obviously located in Bristol, your hometown. Do you ever find it, ironic that you left your hometown, basically travel all over the country work-wise, and then when you get this big job, it's just right back in your hometown where your family is? Can you
It,
talk about, that experience
yeah,
from
it
that
was a
angle?
really no. It's a great question, Michael, and it was really a unique part of it. I didn't grow up. I grew up around ESPN, but I wanted to be a sports writer, and there were no sports writers at ESPN. The information job, it was before Chris Mortensen, who I think Chris, and he was so good to me at ESPN and getting to know him. And I would always try to pick Chris's brain. Whenever he was around Bristol, I'd find excuses to go spend time with him, and he was so generous with me. But Chris wasn't at ESPN till later. Certainly not when I was a kid. It was Sports Center and it was shows, and so I wanted to be a sports writer, and so it never really dawned on me, or I didn't have some goal that I would work at ESPN, because the job that I ended up in didn't exist until I really think Mort was the one who kind of, Peter, Will McDonough to an extent. He was a sports writer who went on NBC and did TV, and I would talk to his son Ryan, who ended up a GM and with the Suns, and I'd always pick his brain about his dad, and so. But as I evolved in my career, and then you started to the information part of it became different. People started to migrate from print to ESPN. Then it maybe, I guess, became a possibility. I would tell you the thing that was maybe most meaningful for me. My dad was. So I went to ESPN in 2017. My dad was in his mid to late 80s, and he still lived in the same house I grew up in. And so it was a mile from ESPN. And so it allowed me to spend more time with him than I would have ever gotten to, because, in that job, if you were at Yahoo traveling around, it was hard to be up in Bristol too much. But now I'm in Bristol a lot. I'm there doing the shows. I'm in for whatever, I'm up there a lot. Back then, now the studios have moved. There's Seaport, and now there's the new one. But when I first started ESPN, you were in Bristol mostly. And then a lot of the NBA stuff moved out to LA after a couple of years. So, but for me I would find an excuse, like all things being equal, I would just try to go to Bristol because I could do Sports Center at 6:05 p.m. and maybe I've got to go be in studio for 11, but at 6, I could leave the studio at 6:10, get in my car, and in 5 minutes I was at his house, and I could sit in the kitchen with him, have dinner with him. He was losing his sight at that point, and he had lost his vision, and so I look back at that, and that was like a really great part of it, meaningful part of it. And he passed away, a few years ago, but I got to spend more time with him at the end of his life than I would have otherwise if I had not gone back to ESPN. And so it's funny, I do think about the work stuff and how great that was to be back at ESPN. And, I could see friends, there's so many people at ESPN who are, working in all different kind of jobs who I went to high school with, or I went to high school with a family member, and I knew him. I had a different perspective around ESPN or being around Bristol. And we mentioned Donovan Clingan at the beginning. My high school was Bristol Central, and I worked with my high school English teacher, she was there for 52, 53 years, and she got me into writing. Gail Dickow. She gave me confidence as a young writer, and so I did a program called the Writing Initiative at the high school, which was scholarships and summer programs and all kind of stuff for the students there. And I got to know Donovan when he was an 8th grader coming into freshman year. I knew his family, his extended family, and so it was like that part of it was really neat, and the connection I had to Bristol was meaningful. It still is, and So yeah, going back there was pretty unique.
I can kind of relate to what you're saying a little bit there, because when I left ESPN at the end of 2017, my mom, who lived in Boston at the time, was in the process of succumbing to Alzheimer's and dementia. So by losing my job, it actually gave me the opportunity to go see her more frequently. And it really made me feel good. And I think it made her feel good, because when it's all said and done, all the headlines, all the shows, whatever awards you get, whatever, it's always family first. At least it always has been for me.
Yeah, and my sister had still lived in Bristol. She moved down, since then. But just having, friends and people around there that there's not a lot of time for that in that role, but it was still always a little strange driving through town. I just hadn't been back there as that much, even this living in New Jersey. So just the familiarity with the town and knowing what ESPN's meant in that community was pretty neat.
Now, Woj, when it came to your reporting, like many Hall of Famers, you always seemed to make it look easy. When a big story broke, let's face it, it was always you that had it. You were the one releasing it. And it became so routine to those working in the business of basketball and also to NBA fans around the globe. But I know it was anything but easy for you to do that. So I'm just curious, what was the toughest challenge for you?
I would say, the demands the demands on family time, probably easily. I think more than anything, just in terms of, even when you're present, you're not always present. You're distracted by something that's going on, whether you're driving the family somewhere and you got to pull over because you got to deal with something, and it just interrupted everybody else's life. My wife used to call my phone the fifth family member. It was this uninvited guest that went on vacation with you. It went to bed with you. It was at the dinner table with you. It was not invited, but it was always there. And it was like this, it had its own, and she was right about that. I would say that it was just, you just had to be available to a lot of people all the time. And it wasn't always necessarily that news was breaking, but if you needed people to be available to you when something was happening, you had to be available in other ways. And that job was like a constant with lots and lots of people. It was this 365-day a year conversation that you're having. And then sometimes it includes news. Most of the time you're talking about and gathering information on lots of things. And but also, like, there's so much writing. It was not, I know people sometimes just pay attention to the tweet and the breaking news, but then not what comes after it. And that's, writing news stories, doing podcasts, the reporting that went into explaining how something came together. Jeff Passan, who I worked with at Yahoo for a long time, and then he came to ESPN. He's a close friend of mine. I always thought he really crystallized why breaking news had value. Why did it have value to be first? Why was it important to break news? Because to break news, it forces you to be involved, in most cases, sort of very acutely aware of the process, that you had to be on top of the process that was going on that got to a decision. It might be a trade. It might be a free agency decision. It might be a hiring of a coach, a firing of a coach or a GM. It's not like something where it just springs up. Typically, you've been following it sometimes it just pops up. But in most cases, you're following, there's a thing going on that you're talking to everybody involved in, and it may lead to a trade. It may not lead to a trade. They come close and then everyone walks away. But it forces you to be fully immersed in what's leading up to that decision. And then it allows you to report on it and explain it to the reader, to the audience, in a way that you otherwise can't unless you've been doing that. So the value isn't just in the moment you break news, but it's, Ramona Shelburne and I might do kind of like, hey, here's all that led into, here's how this deal came together, or any number of my colleagues and I, we might work on those together, or I did it. You might do it solo. That's where I think it has great value if you do more than just a transaction. And I always try to do, when you're at trade deadline or it's free agency, it's rapid fire, right? You got one thing coming after another. There's like a 3 or 4 day window where you don't really have the time to sit and do that long piece. You're on to the next one. But most of the year you do, and we did. And that's where I think the breaking news has value. But the cost of it in terms of your time and your energy and your focus is at any one moment you're following any number of these situations. Some peter out and never become anything. Mm-hmm. Mostly they peter out. You've worked for a team, Ross,
Yep.
There's a million things discussed that don't lead to anything.
Yeah.
But I've got to try to be aware, and you're aware of them, and I always felt the hardest decision in reporting in the job I did was, when did something rise to the level that you needed to report it? Because there's a million things that are going on that don't really get real traction. It's a thought, it's a conversation. But when does it rise to the level where you've got to say, hey, this thing is going on? I always thought that was the most difficult choice, because so many things are just going to fall by the wayside. They're not serious. And I sort of had criteria in my head about when it rose to that level, but it was that part of it never got easier to me.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the story part, because that was always my favorite. You would break the news, someone's been traded, and then I'd wait for the news story, because you were the one that had the actual clarity into why maybe this deal got done, or the reason this team decided to move on from said player. And I always enjoyed that. So that makes a ton of sense there, Woj. Appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
Now, of all the big time stories and projects that you broke throughout your years, do you have a personal favorite?
There's a few, but one that, and probably along, it was a favorite because it was something I hadn't tried before. Mm-hmm. And it's something, obviously a subject you're very familiar with from your time with the Bucks. Yeah. But we did a series, kind of like a 30 for 30 podcast series. It was during COVID when we got it done, called the Giannis Draft. And it was about, I had gotten to know Giannis through his agent, Alex Aratzis, early on in Milwaukee. He wasn't a phenomenon the first couple of years. He was an interesting draft pick. It was an interesting story. And he was a skinny young kid, but it wasn't like the world was descending on Milwaukee to chronicle him in year one. It wasn't quite like that. Nope. And fairly quickly changed. And so the beginnings of the Giannis thing was always very interesting to me. And so we did kind of a 3-part podcast series. I think each was about 45 minutes. And I narrated it, wrote the script, worked with my editor, Cristina Daglas, who happened to also be Greek and really knew Greek music, and helped score it, the audio of it, which was really, otherwise we wouldn't have been able to do that. And her and Andrew Hahn, we worked on it, but it was different, and I hadn't done it, and it was a fun challenge. And what made it, there were so many people, it was about sort of his emergence in Greece and who he was and where he came from and the forces that allowed him to start to get noticed. And then the NBA trying to figure out who he was, how seriously do we take this kid? How good could he be? And Wes Wilcox and Danny Ferry in Atlanta, Kenny Atkinson was an assistant on their staff, and all of them at different points went over to see him. And, Atlanta was like Milwaukee, like like John Hammond and Jeff Weltman. Jeff left before they drafted Giannis. He left that spring for Toronto, but Jeff had been very involved in the kind of recognizing there was something special there, and so anyway, doing that whole audio podcast series, which I remember I was supposed to sit down with Giannis we had a couple different dates right before, it must have been February, because it was March when the world shut down, and we had to kind of shelve it until we could figure out what was going to happen with the bubble. And then once we got in the bubble, Giannis and I and we did, and we sat down, and he was incredible. He was incredible because he has such incredible recall of events and an incredible attention to detail. Mm-hmm. And we had done so much interview work, and I was bringing him a lot of material that I wasn't sure whether he would remember some of these stories or not. And not only did he remember them, he remembered them in just full Technicolor detail, right? And that's what really made having his voice in it was pretty neat. And so what he brought to it. And so that was a really fun project for me because it was different than anything I had done before that.
So what would you mention?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. You had mentioned how your job as an NBA insider is basically 24/7, 365, and that means you've done countless stories. I'm just curious, do you remember any particular story that kind of quote unquote put you on the map as terms of being an NBA insider, either before you came to ESPN, even back to your Yahoo days?
I remember the first story at Yahoo that I brought. This was Twitter may have existed. I wasn't on it yet. And it showed how different it was. It must have been my first year at Yahoo. And I broke a story. Unfortunately, Greg Oden, it was the first of a number of injuries he suffered. He was the number 1 overall pick. He had suffered a knee injury. He was going to be out for the season. I think they had told the Blazers, it was during training camp, they had told the Blazer players about it. I found out about it. I got it confirmed. And it was so different. I wrote a story. I sent it in. It got posted on Yahoo. And I'm sort of just sitting there refreshing the page going, okay, is anyone going to see? And it was, Oden was a big story. It was number 1 pick. And it was leading our site. It was leading and I'm like, is anyone seeing that it's there? Again, there was nobody. I don't really think Twitter was, if it was there, it wasn't anything people were really using yet. And I remember like 45 minutes, an hour in, all of a sudden the AP came out with something and confirmed the story. And then ESPN had to confirm it. And it was just so different how you reported the news. And it wasn't like a newspaper where it came out the next day. But I remember that was like what I felt was like the first national story I did. But it wasn't, no one really noticed it was on the site. And then Twitter started to change the instantaneous notice that people had, and it became kind of the scoreboard on breaking news, and it became part of it. And that was like, I think 2009 draft night when I signed up and started Twitter on draft night. And so, and then I would say 2 things changed it. It was Twitter, yes, but LeBron going the Olympic team in 2008, when the guys started to talk about teaming up, and then there was a build up to 2010 free agency. And when LeBron and Chris Bosh went to Miami, I always believed, to me, that changed my job or our job. It created the modern insider. Now there was so much focus on not just the superstar players moving or trying to team up, but now people, I think, were much more acutely aware of the salary cap and creating a max salary slot. Oh, hey, they're creating 2 max salary slots. Hey, they just traded this guy into cap space. That means they're only, $13 million away from having a max spot to go after, player A, B, and C next summer. That became its own thing. And that really changed the job. And where there was an audience who had a tremendous appetite for not just the big player move or the signing or the big trade, but all the smaller deals that led to that bigger trade. And it became this subset of covering the league. And for a lot of people, they were more interested in that than they were in the actual basketball. For better or worse, it became its own separate sport. And I could at least see, hey, there's this tremendous appetite for this information, and you became more motivated to try to deliver it.
So, Woj, let's discuss the newest chapter in your career, and that is with the Bonnies. You are the general manager of the men's basketball team at St. Bonaventure. And just briefly here, can you tell us an overview of what your main responsibilities are?
And I remember something Sam Presti would always say about being a general manager. He said, the key word in that is general.
Yeah.
And he's exactly, I know it. I understand it more now. I'm not comparing what I do to an NBA GM, but you are responsible for a lot. And there's a lot that falls in that falls on you to handle every day. It might be, I'll just think about today. I spent time recruiting. I spent time watching tape on some international players, planning out an international trip and who we're going to go see. Maybe working on a couple campus visits, getting on a couple Zooms for fundraising, talking to our trainer about an injury, spending time with our point guard for a half an hour this afternoon, just talking about the team and what he's seeing and what he's feeling out there. We've got a new locker room that's almost ready to be unveiled for our players. They've been in the softball locker room since summer. Oh, wow. So we have a new film room. We have a new locker room. And I kind of toured that. Like just in the last 10 days, we've made a ton of progress. It's almost done. So took a couple people through that today. So, it's, I don't know, 10, 17 at night. And I'm still in the office, which is fine. We had a Zoom with our boosters, with a bunch of our supporters, with one of our players. And I listened in on that, and he was great talking to our people. So at any given day, right. And I watched us practice for a while. So I love it. It's been great. The best part is being around our players every day, there's an energy to being on campus, and you forget that when you're away from it, especially at this place. Obviously I went to St. Bonaventure. I met my wife at St. Bonaventure. Our new film room for the team was once the student newspaper office where I met my wife. So
no way.
That's interesting to me. I was in there sitting in these big cushy chairs that we have in there that are pretty cool. And, like I first met my wife, and back then they were, whatever the kind of little, we had the little Mac computers for the student paper. And so, a lot of the great parts of my life have come from my time at Bonaventure. And so I'm really enjoying being back, and we're excited about this group of guys we have. But listen, so much of this job right now is raising money and being able to financially be competitive in a league like the Atlantic 10, where we have competitors who might have had better facilities, metropolitan locations, perhaps. We've always been in some areas a disadvantage, but we've had great success, especially under our current coach, Mark Schmidt. But this money gulf is dramatic, and you've got to have money to be able to recruit players and then retain them. Another thing I did today, I was on the phone with somebody who, we were just talking about some of the different financial levels and some of the negotiating stuff that's, some teams who are already working to re-sign guys for next year. And you're just looking at those timelines and trying to figure out how much money you're going to have before you can outlay money with contract offers. You've got to know how much you have to work with. And I've got to raise that money. And so a lot of stuff, but I'm really enjoying it. To be 56 years old, Ross, and to learn something entirely new is great. Not that I ever had the other thing figured out, but I kind of knew what to expect each day. There are always surprises. We're here, you're just I think there's things that helped me in my previous job that are helpful to me here, and that maybe made me effective there. I think can help me to be effective here. But I also know I have all these blind spots, and you've got to be honest with yourself about what your blind spots are. And A, surround yourself with people who know a lot better, than B, learn, right? Learn and work at that. And that's been fun, just learning a whole new discipline and trying to, lean on a lot of people and a lot of relationships that I've built through the years. I've always, and I mean this, I'm not that smart, but I do know a lot of smart people. And so that's how I've tried to approach this job.
Yeah, that's the most important part.
Hey, well, one of the things you mentioned that, you have to, I'm assuming you have to learn as part of this new career is the NIL part of collegiate sports here. And I'm just curious, it's obviously a new thing. In the old days, older days, it was under the table stuff. That's how you got your money. Now it's out in the open. And I'm just curious, at St. Bonaventure or anywhere, but I'm just saying for you specifically, do companies that offer NIL deals to your athletes, do they have to go through some sort of vetting process before they can make deals to play? How does it go? How does the deal work as far as NIL in terms of colleges, specifically your program?
Well, in this year now we can do Rev Share, which means the school can pay the players through the money we raise internally. I had worked pretty closely and had kind of led the effort amongst a lot of people in starting a collective several years ago for our program. And so I had been working on that side of it, but the money with Rev Share, not that the schools can pay, the money has grown dramatically, especially in our conference in the Atlantic 10. And so we have a few guys who have NIL deals outside of what we can give with Rev Share. But for the most part, at a school like Bonaventure, you're having to raise the money. You're having to find partnerships to do that and raise it internally. So, most of the money paid out to our players is being paid out by us this year. The outside deals, and we do have, Joe Grahovac, who is a top recruit of ours from California. Joe's got a deal with WWE and Fanatics. And you have to go through, it's called NIL Go. You have to submit the NIL deal to this third-party NCAA vetting process, and they have to approve the deal that it's a market that, by their interpretation, it's a market. It's a deal that financially fits the marketplace. It's not a booster deal where you're just trying to circumvent essentially the salary cap that exists. And so there is some approval on the NIL stuff that you have to do.
I digress for just a moment. So the film room is where you met your wife. So is that going to be renamed the Amy Wojnarowski Film Room at St. Bonaventure University? I mean, yes or no, Woj?
No, we're going to try to find someone to put their name up in there. But it may not be, unless she's given a ton to this school, but I'm not sure it'll be her name up there or mine. That's for sure.
Well, she gave you to the school in some ways. So, the other chain of command, not including your family, in college sports normally has the head basketball coach, reports to the athletic director. But with you in the GM position, does the head coach report to you? Are you both sort of equals who report to the AD? How does that chain of command flow?
No, it's very clear. I work for the basketball coach and I work for our staff. I'm here to support them. I mean, I work for our players. I'm in charge of lunch orders. That's what I'm in charge of here.
I used to have that job.
Yeah. I mean, we've got a Hall of Fame level coach here in Mark Schmidt. It's his 19th year at Bonaventure. He's won at a level that I never imagined we could win at St. Bonaventure. And by almost any metric over the last, he took over a program that had won one game. And so let's say his last 15, 16 years after he built it up from the first couple of years, nobody's had more first team All-Atlantic 10 players. we're top 4 in winning percentage, home, away, conference, non-conference, top 3 or 4 in that time, and a couple Atlantic 10 championships. We're 12-8 in our last 20 against Power 4 and Big East. 12-8 in our last 20 against Big 10, SEC, Big 12, ACC, Big East. And out of those 20 exactly, none of them were played in the building I'm in here. They were all either road games or neutral. And for a school with 2,000 students in rural upstate New York, we have 2,000 undergrad students. That's pretty remarkable. It really is. And so that's beating UCLA in the NCAA tournament, beating Syracuse in the Dome. The NIT, we made an NIT Final Four run a few years ago, one at Colorado, one at Oklahoma, and one at Virginia to go play Xavier at the Garden. And, it's so Coach has had a great run here. I'm here to help him, support him. And yeah, the model's different in college. I think only Andrew Luck at Stanford, and you could understand why. He's Andrew Luck. I think that might be the only place the coach answers to the GM. Certainly, I'm not aware of anywhere in basketball that is. And so it's different than the pro model for sure.
Now, Woj, in terms of social media, you have this enormous following, over 6 million on Twitter, /X. And I'm just curious, that with that kind of reach, it would seem that it would have a huge value to the school. I'm just curious, has there been any data or whatever on how your brand has impacted the trajectory of this program?
Well, what we try to do is I try to use it with deals we're doing with, certainly promoting our players, but promoting, we can reach, I still have over 2 million on Instagram and over 6 million on Twitter. And I think it does have value, and we try to use it in different partnerships we have that they can, that we can reach a lot of folks with it and still. And so I try to be judicious. I know people I still see the comments, give me a trade. And I understand that. I know the whole world isn't as passionate about St. Bonaventure basketball as I am or our people are. But yes, I do think it has value. And we've tried to, in storytelling about our program and creating, when kids announce they're coming to Bonaventure, I'm allowed to retweet it. I can make a comment. It's interesting if, let's say a kid commits, but he hasn't signed yet, and it's broken by one of the recruiting analysts or whoever, I can retweet it, but I can't comment over it unless he's signed the letter. So I can do a separate tweet with like a bomb or something. And then I can retweet it. So, but I do think some of the kids get a kick out of that. That can kind of come with an announcement for us. And so I say the only ones, you got to commit to the Bonnies or you got to stay with the Bonnies and come back on another deal to get what would be considered, I guess, a Woj bomb now.
Nice. Well, of course, in preparation for this podcast, Woj, I did a little bit of homework, probably not enough, but I looked at your recruiting class, watched some film of some guys, and you already mentioned the guy that I wanted to ask you a little bit more about here tonight, and that is Joe Grahovac. I hope I pronounced that correctly, but just an incredible story, living out of his truck, hooping at a fitness center, and he seems to be like a real diamond in the rough kind of big man, 6'10", can do a little bit of everything out there on the floor, and you were one of the guys that discovered him. So curious to get your thoughts on his game moving forward with your program and what we can expect to maybe see from him next season.
Yeah, Joe is as unique of a person, a story, a player that I've ever come across. He played 1 year of junior college basketball at Fullerton College under Perry Webster, who's one of the best JC coaches in America. He'll be a Division I head coach, I think, sooner than later. Got great coaching from him and his staff there. They saved his life in a lot of ways. Joe's 24 years old this year with us as a sophomore. Didn't really played a little bit in high school, but didn't have staying power with it. And Joe's worked jobs like baling hay and worked in a warehouse, and he's worked woodworking. was playing in 24/7 Fitness, played some Drew League in LA, and has really only played organized basketball 1 year, and then what he's done here, and it's incredible to see. We're going to have a pro day on Saturday in New York City on the 11th. 20 plus NBA teams, 22, 23 as of now.
Wow.
And there are a lot of people anxious to see Joe among our other guys. We had an NBA team in recently to come watch practice, spend a day. We'll have some more in, guys will come through. But I think there's a lot of curiosity among NBA people. There were a number of them who went and watched him last year at Fullerton College, and they want to see more. And I think, they'll see how Joe plays for us. But he's 6'10", incredible passer. He's got guard skills. He handles like a guard, shoots 40% from three, shot over 60% from the field last year in junior college. He's got that quick twitch athleticism, plays up over the rim, blocks shots. He was 198 pounds. I saw him play his last JC game last year at Fullerton. He was 198 pounds, had not always been able to have great nutrition, certainly hadn't really done much strength training until he got to Fullerton. And now he's at 215. I think he could probably get a little stronger. Certainly he's put a ton of work in the weight room. But he's a very interesting player, Ross. I think people are going to, and his look is he's got a big head of red hair. He's got a big red beard. He reminds people of Bill Walton. He's going to wear number 32 for us. Cool. He's not going to wear the headband. We talked very briefly about that.
Yeah.
And I said, listen, we don't want Bill Walton. We want Joe Grahovac. You'll wear what you're comfortable with. But he's the most popular guy on campus. Joe does not, he did not grow up watching really much, even really cable TV. He certainly didn't know who I was when I started recruiting him. He didn't know what Selection Sunday was, never heard of it. And the things that might have been disadvantages for us in our recruitment were advantages with him. He loved the idea of a small school. He liked our rural location. He was not afraid of the snow. His recruiting visit at 23 years old was the first time he'd ever been on an airplane.
Wow.
And so we've been really fortunate to have him here. And he's a great teammate, and I think he's going to play, along with some, several other guys in our group. I think he's got a big future ahead of him.
That's awesome.
So,
I'm sorry, Bruce, go ahead.
Yeah. I was just going to say, so you recruited 6 international players, 3 of them from Europe. And, there has to be a learning curve, going international to find players. So what was that process like for you to kind of, ingratiate yourself into these different countries to convince these guys to come to the States?
Yeah, it was fun. I really enjoyed the chase. I really enjoyed the pursuit and getting to know those guys. Ilya Ermakov from Moscow, obviously you couldn't go visit him. He couldn't come visit us. We did that all through. He was the player we knew the least, but his tape was so impressive. I was able to get some scouting reports from NBA teams who, as Ross knows, they just have tremendous intel, even on guys who are young, and he was 17 years old, was able to get a lot of good intel, and that matched up, and worked with his agents, worked with his agents at BDA Sports, Nico Filipovic and Alex Caravan, and they were really excited about Bonaventure and thought we were a fit because of our coach and our style and the fact that maybe I could help him with some things here and some exposure. But the other guys, Achille Linati, who's from Milano, 6'5" guard from Italy, really, played for that great Milano club team since he was 11, 12 years old, had a lot of success with national team in Italy, winning medals. It's kind of a golden age for Italian basketball for his age group. Those guys have won a lot. And him I got to really know. Went and watched him play initially in Belgrade, went and spent time in Milan with his family, I went back again and saw him. Our head coach went to see him, and there was something that R.C. Buford said to me once, and I don't want to name drop, but it stayed with me with him. He wasn't always the best player on his Italian teams, but he was always the guy in big games, championship games, medal games for the national team that would step up, would have, his best games, big fourth quarters. When they needed a big shot, Lunati was very often, he just had that poise about him and that maturity. And he was a glue guy wherever it was. Again, it wasn't always, but just his competitive nature, how serious-minded, and we've seen it since he's come here. He brings a very professional mindset to how he prepares every day, how he stretches, how he trains, how seriously he takes school, how seriously he takes being a great teammate. And I remember something RC said to me about Manu Ginobili remember once we were talking about Manu playing national team and he was getting older in his career, and people were like, he's beating up his body playing all these national team games but Manu couldn't, that's who he was. He couldn't stay away from it. He felt it was an obligation. And RC just said, hey, like that's what makes him the player he is. But when you think about culture and the Spurs, when Manu was a young player, RC said, he would always say to him, I want you to bring that Argentinian national team culture to the Spurs. Bring it to us, what you have, because that was those were like some of the favorite teams I've ever covered. Those Argentina teams in international competition, they had such a great run together. And I said that to Lunati and Achille was, I want you to bring that culture you got from that Milano club team with Ettore Messina is at the top of the who came to the NBA and with the Spurs and with some others. And I'm like, bring that culture to St. Bonaventure. And he has. And, culture to me it's like every day you fight for it. It's not like a sign on the wall. It's not, your culture to me is as good as like, did everybody go to class today? Did everybody go to study hall? Did guys stay after to do extra shooting? Are guys in the weight room? And if you were spotty today in it, your culture is not very good, because it's just this thing to me that you have to be very cognizant of every day. And you just can't, it's not like this thing you have and you have it up on a shelf and it sits there and so guys like that, when they go about their business, and those were the guys we were trying to find, and like, who were just very serious about being good teammates and want to be in the gym. And so that's what we tried to find this year and invest our resources in.
Well, you mentioned, a little bit earlier about the pro day that's coming up on October 11th, this Saturday. And I'm just, it'll be the first pro day ever hosted by a team from a mid-major conference. And as well as, if I'm not mistaken, as well as the first collegiate pro day at an off-campus site. So I'm just curious, talk about what that means for your program, what that means, like the pride you must have in this thing developing, coming to fruition.
Yeah, like that was a big drawing in recruiting this year, and talking to guys about the opportunity to go play in front of NBA, G League executives, and we'll have GMs there, we'll have team presidents there, we'll have scouts, and across the board. I tell our guys all the time, because I know all the GMs doesn't mean I can get you in the NBA. That's not how it works. But what I can do is, number one, get you on their radar and make sure they know everything they need to know about you. Andrew Osasui, who's our big guy from Italy, was on the Andrew was on the gold medal under 20 team in Italy. He's another player that I think teams are going to be interested in seeing. He's got a 7'4" wingspan, big shot blocking freshman. Frank Mitchell, we have from University of Minnesota, Buddy Simmons. We have a lot of guys, Asante Bowen, our senior captain, who started Iowa and came to us. And, listen, some of these are going to be, I don't know if we have a player who's going to get drafted. I don't know if we have a player who's going to get a two-way. But what we can do is, number one, get you exposed to all the decision makers. And, it's a process. Nobody's going to come to our pro day and say, oh, it's okay. I got up close. I watched this player closely. I saw his body. I saw how some of his decision making and some of the stuff they're doing. And okay, now I'm going to go see what he looks like in January against St. Joe's. I'm going to go to Florida in November and watch him against North Carolina. They want to see Joe Grahovac go from junior college to St. Bonaventure. Now, how does he look against the Carolina guys Thanksgiving week in Fort Myers? And I can help him get good information. And my responsibility is to make sure guys understand, like, it is incredibly hard to be a professional. It's incredibly hard to become a G League player. And it's incredibly hard to go have a career in EuroLeague or play overseas. It's all really hard. And but we can get them good information, and I can get our guys with NBA guys, before, in the off season. Joe Grahovac, Donovan Clingan was out working out in Irvine, which isn't far from Joe's house. And Joe went over and spent a couple of days working out with Donovan. We call him, everybody calls him Big Joe. And I called him after the first workout with Donovan Clingan. I said, how did it go? He goes, I'm not Big Joe around him. I'm Medium Joe. Donovan Clingan, right? And so, but and Donovan's been a good mentor. And I just told Donovan, if you can just be a sounding board for Joe as he's going through this process. And, last year, Donovan Mitchell, we've got Donovan Mitchell is part of our Adidas deal, made St. Bonaventure, along with his alma mater, Louisville, one of his signature shoe schools. And DeSante Bowen went with me and a couple of our players out to shoot kind of like a little announcement of it. And DeSante and Donovan both went to Brewster Academy. And DeSante had broken his foot and he was out injured. And Donovan has had, a number of injuries. And I asked Donovan, can you talk to DeSante about the mental part of this? And they spent time that day talking about, where Donovan said, your surgeons did a great job. Your foot is going to be healed. What you're going to what the challenge is going to be is mentally trusting that foot and getting past that. And maybe you need to go talk to somebody about that. And gave him what he went through coming back from injuries and mistakes he felt he made. And, I think that stuff can be invaluable. Listen, it's one thing for me to tell a guy that, it's another thing when Donovan Mitchell can tell you that. And so, to get our guys exposure to those guys. And then, I think for me, it's also getting them exposure to Bonaventure was transformational in my life. I mean, nobody in my family had gone to college before me. Bonaventure gave me confidence and belief that I could have a career in this craft that I wanted to pursue. And I still think it could be transformational for these guys. And it may not be a 4-year experience. It might be a 2-year experience here. It might be a 3-year experience. It might be 1 year. But my goal is to try to put people in their lives here who they can take with them beyond, not just in basketball, but, our guys who are business majors. And we have alums who love basketball, love our school, who can be mentors to them in things beyond basketball. And I want to try to put those people in their lives and they can take them with them when they leave here, whether that's from the basketball world or, for when the ball stops bouncing. And we have a unique place here. People love this university. They stay very close to it. And, I want our players to feel that. And retention is the hardest thing, more than recruiting this year. It's retention. We want to keep as many of these guys as we can. Money will play a part in that, but also will the experience of being here, the environment that we help create for them. I think that's going to be more important than the money. I really do. And so that's kind of a thing you're trying to work on every day, because it's perpetual free agency. Everybody's a free agent every year. And it's a challenge.
Woj, you've been unbelievably generous with your time, but I only have one more question for you. And that is simply, It's your second season as the Bonny's GM. What's your number one goal for the year ahead?
It's a good question. I think this is a team that, we have 11 of our 13 scholarship guys are new. I think this is a team that will get better as the year goes on. We've got some really good young players who I think it takes a little while to make the adjustment. But, for me, like to see a sold out, a packed house, to see our place engaged with our team, to see our guys engaged on campus and in our community. And that's what separates Bonaventure is this. And that's what's kept us in a league like the Atlantic 10 with only 2,000 students. And so like we're in the fight. And I don't know whether that's, of course, I'd love for us to win the Atlantic 10. I'd love for us to cut down nets. But if we're being honest with ourselves about where the world is right now and, some of the challenges we have, I want us to be in the fight.
All right. Well, Woj, once again, thanks so much for taking the time out of your night. You mentioned it earlier. It's 10:46 in your office right now at St. Bonaventure. We really appreciate you sticking with us this late at night to join us on the 48 Minutes podcast.
It was a blast to be with you. You guys do an incredible job. It was an honor to be on. And, I appreciate it. Appreciate getting a chance to visit with you guys.